Hello, and welcome to a special edition of the Advent IM podcast, Risk and Business. And today I'm joined by our own colleague, Michael Hayes, or Mick, as he's known to his friends. Hi, Mick.
Hi, Mike. Thanks for the kind introduction. And as Mike says, I'm the head of consultancy at Advent IM.
And we're going to have a brief discussion today because in April 2025, DSTL published a support documentation for the MOD Secure by Design, which they have cunningly called the Secure by Design Problem Book, intended to highlight, in this case, 4 of the main problems being encountered when delivering Secure by Design and some of the ways to solve those problems. So we thought we'd have a discussion about them. The first problem, which really isn't a new problem that addresses Secure by Design, is a problem that we see across the cybersecurity and information security landscape, which is the need to upskill personnel across the landscape. So in this case, we have got SQEPs, a suitably qualified and experienced person, who could be an internal expert or it could be an external consultancy who understands the process. But then we're surrounded by a whole load of people who include senior officers and civil servants and MOD employees who just don't understand SBD at this stage.
Yeah, that's correct. And I know typically as well in defence, particularly if they're looking at an internal sort of SQEP, it's quite difficult to upskill the personnel, give them all the training and they develop the experience, and then quite quickly they get moved on to a completely different job. So retaining personnel in the right jobs to do what you want them to do is I think is an eternal problem, which I'm sure many across defence would appreciate, and particularly experience. I've no doubt.
Well, this was a challenge we experienced even under the old system of accreditation, that accreditors would come and go. We often cycle in, do their 2-year rotation as a launch pad to moving on to something new.
That's right, yeah, and that's the accreditor giving, sort of reviewing your system or whatever you've submitted, and obviously, ultimately making that accreditation decision on behalf of the system, the capability owner. But yeah, the person involved in either a project team or say that capability team, whose system it is, having a security expertise on there to be able to look after it, follow the process, and as it is now, will be following that SBD approach. I think is probably extremely challenging at the moment.
Because to do Secure by Design well, and we're seeing this on active projects we're involved in, it really does require that a fundamental change in thinking about how we do design and how we design in security.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think the key one there is getting it right in from the start, and by security being involved amongst all the other stakeholders and interested parties with this system, it enables them to be involved in discussions right from the start as well. So security requirements can be discussed, and all those sort of considerations can be discussed at the early stage, and hopefully by doing that, it just aims it to be a bit more sort of very much joined up approach.
So maybe some element of security capability should be built into the competency frameworks for all career groups, not just for those going into security as a career.
I think so, yeah, absolutely, because I think there's opportunities here for delivering an awareness of this for all levels, and for all levels within the project and all roles, and like a lot of people now have got used to general security awareness training for what their organisations deliver, to have a tailored security, let's say SPD, type sort of awareness and training catered to the role and responsibilities you have for that system, I think then gives them that awareness of what it is. And I think that can only, be a good thing.
Yeah, no, I really agree with that. And I think that kind of then picks up problem two that they've highlighted, which is that there may be unevenly distributed information and knowledge. In some cases, that's because the information or the knowledge about a capability can't be discussed openly because of its sensitivity. But also, there may be a lack of professionals, whether it's engineers, designers, or security professionals, in pockets, and that then opens up another little circle of the Venn diagram, which is how all of that affects the wider aspect of assurance of supply chains.
That's right. There's a few points I think to pick out of all that. And I think the sharing of information, etc., particularly down to classification, I think a big problem what they're encountering in projects is an ability to reuse assurance evidence. So if it turns out there are components or elements of your capability that have been used elsewhere, for other capabilities in use across defence, where it's previously been assured and a certain level of assurance has already been accepted or gained, then that ability for it to be available for other stakeholders, other projects to utilise and being able to assess and assess if it's applicable to them and we're used. I think it'll just save time, it'll save resource, and potentially, significant, money as well, because I think with all these projects and systems being done in isolation from each other, sometimes you can have you can have some aspects what are done 1, 2, 10 times, where that's not efficient use of sort of time and resource.
Yeah, and we're seeing it with supply chain assurance at the moment, where the same supplier is getting picked up, numerous times, they say 1, 2, 10 times, by different capability owners, when they've already done all of the assurance that they need to provide the evidence that they meet the requirements as a supplier. We should be reusing that, and the amount of time that's wasted at the buyer end doing the assurance, the amount of time that's wasted at the supplier end doing the assurance, multiplied up across all of the supply chain, it's a phenomenal amount of money and time, isn't it?
It is, yeah, and I think this is one point I want to pick out of that problem as well. And you sort of, you touched on it earlier. The third party assurance, third party supplier assurance program, I think is fundamental to a lot of this. Getting that, going down to the to the nth degree, or as far as depending on obviously probably the sensitivity, of the system, what's being going to be assured. But I think if you get that audit program correct and you can assure your third party to a good level, then I think that reaps its benefits throughout. Being sort of confident, for the supply route and it being trusted. And I think the other thing as well, what it could help them to achieve is, if there's those sensitivities between the product, if it's commercially sensitive information, and the supplier is reluctant to release certain details, through for things like copyright reasons or such like, to protect their product, then I think if we get the audit program right, and i.e., they could show that it's had independent assessments conducted of it, things like ITL checks, check testing, it's had vulnerability assessments, and stuff like that. They don't need to give actually the real workings of how that product works, because they're showing the security assessments being done of it, and effectively you could say it's been given a green light, as it were. So I think that achieves its assurance without actually release this sort of sensitive information behind it.
And we're not asking organisations here to reinvent the wheel, are we? Because things like DEFCON 658 and DEFSTAN 05138. And the need to protect MOD identifiable information, those standards exist, and the guidance exists. So secure by design isn't introducing something new or fancy or reinventing the wheel here. What we're saying is use those existing standards and guidance, but do it well and do it properly.
Yeah, absolutely. And by doing then implementing an audit program of that, from MOD, to audit its suppliers and then ensure it's sort of like its prime contractors are auditing their supply chain, then actually if we start building in the evidence that actually the supply chain is being assured. We're not just asking them to do it and they're giving us assurance it's being done and obviously signing a contract to say it's been done. We're also auditing it's been done. So actually, the stakeholder and probably the capability owner for the, whatever the system in question will be, can get some assurance that actually, I've got confidence that they are doing what, they promised they would do.
And what it would also do is it would give us greater clarity and transparency about where in the supply chain that
Yeah.
lack of capability exists, where that unevenly distributed capability exists. And then we could develop strategies to close those gaps.
Absolutely, because by knowing what the issue is, you can risk manage that, and as I say, implement measures to remedy. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's still challenges within there, obviously, in terms of commercial sensitivities, export requirements, and so on, which again sometimes act as blockers to the distribution of information up the supply chain as well.
Yeah, yes, there is. Yeah, and it's just another point I wanted to sort of add as well, because I know it is very much a discussion, about companies being audited 7, 8 times, where it largely covers the same questions, providing the same answers. That's also another opportunity to actually share evidence of that, because as I say, if one program is being audited, then actually within the supply chain, defence supply chain, for example, if that is sort of made available, then actually when someone does put a search in for a particular company, they can see when it was last audited, what evidence there is, and then effectively do a gap analysis on that and just look, well, it didn't cover this particular aspect. Maybe it only covered up to sort of dealing with officials, official sensitive, and actually this needs to focus on high classification. But that also, by sharing that, I think that audit evidence could be very useful to sort of to have the minimal impact to supply chain as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. So the third part of the problem playbook, it talks about secure by design needing to be integrated into the very earliest stages of capability acquisition. And it goes on to say the challenge with that is that the very early stages of capability acquisition are pre-concept and concept stages. So how do we do secure by design when really it's little more than a concept?
Yeah, this is something I've absolutely experienced. You take on a project which has been quite often, it's gone past the pre-concept stage because it's been contract award to the supplier, and there's elements you expect to receive because they've not been done at the pre-concept. I really think this absolutely is echoed in other areas. Security representation needs to be involved right from day one, being one of so it mentions the DLODs, but I think security, it covers many of those areas, but security in its own right has to be factored in right from the start, because then I think security requirements can be factored in from the start. But what could also happen is they can ask, it can prompt the discussion over what are you trying to achieve, what's what's the criticality of the capability going to be, sensitive, the classification of the data, what is the impact. So by that it can start to understand a bit of a risk appetite, which is going to shape security requirements, and start prompting some of those security requirements to be issued.
Yeah, and by its very name, secure by design, the best place to get security built in is at the concept stage when you start thinking about a design,
Yeah.
and making sure that So for some of the stuff that we're doing with clients at the moment, actually providing training courses to people who work in R&D rather than to security teams, so that they understand secure by design and the questions they should be asking when they're coming up with these concepts.
Absolutely, and I think I've got another great example. I think from someone who, a company obviously we're working with, is where they've developed a design, and they've come to us to ask for as it were, a proxy senior responsible owner, proxy SRO solution to review their proposed design and consider, if it's likely to meet the SPD requirements, and provide some advice on areas for improvement or any of the challenges it may encounter before
Yeah,
before they've even developed the program. And I think that's an absolutely great idea, and I think that would be something what would be good right at the pre-concept stages, just to, yes, it might be a little bit before getting into a specific design, but by shaping those ideas and those requirements, it's going to help inform the design and probably make it more easier when it comes to that stage.
yeah. And there's a great line actually in the problem playbook, where it says security, like interoperability, safety, and the environment, cross-cuts the defense line of development, DLODs, and therefore has to be considered. And you're right, imagine only considering safety way after you've let a contract and the build of the capability has begun.
Yeah, it's and because it's like that, I feel a lot of as I say, a lot of projects, capability, stakeholders, etc. They understand safety. They are absolutely aware of the impact if safety, is compromised or there's issues there. But they don't get security and don't get the impact on not getting security right and what will affect them. And obviously, one thing SPD approach has massively emphasised and promoted is the capability owner's responsibility to manage risk with this and responsible for that. So emphasising that and getting that message across is if something goes wrong with security, it's their data, it's their information, it's their output what is at risk from this. And again, that gets back to the earlier securities in there and giving that information, providing that sort of information, I think can only be better because it's raising everyone's awareness.
Absolutely. And so we sort that end of the scale out. So we sort out the earlier scales and we get security being thought about at concept stage. And then the final problem 4 that they've identified is maintaining it. It's the sustainability long term. Engineering can take years. Capabilities can be in operational service for decades, and secure by design. Now the approach is that this has to be continuous throughout the lifetime of the capability.
Yeah, this is huge. I think this is a huge problem, and I know this from many years working with defence, etc. It tends to be covered. It's reasonably been covered during development, in development while a project's being developed, built, and then when it comes to being handed over, it gets handed over to the frontline command or who's going to be the users, the capability users, and then the project team steps back. So even then, through life, just looking after the system sort of slowed down, and quite often security was just never factored in because accreditation. We've got our accreditation, we've got a nice certificate, which our lads you don't get anymore, and absolutely worth reminding people you don't get an accreditation certificate, and then you're worried about it 3 or 5 years later. So now this system gets handed over. And more often than not, I think there are 2 problems. One, you hand it over, and who you hand it over to don't know what they need to do with it, don't know what the responsibility is and how to look after it through life. And secondly, and probably more importantly, there is absolutely no resource to do that. They haven't got a scrap. Okay, who's going to look after this? And I really think that's probably the key area to get right, because if you get a resource to look after it for the day-to-day management of security to make sure it's right, I think that individual, that person, that team will then steer, making sure security is looked after continually.
Which almost brings us back to problem one. How do we upskill the defence community in secure by design? Because that's going to be critical to getting continuous assurance as part of BAU once the capability is in service.
Yeah.
So,
and it's not an easy one, is it? It's not an easy one. What is the solution on that? Well, time, money and expensive, but I think...
Well, doing continuous assurance isn't something that can be done on a shoestring budget. It doesn't have to be prohibitively costly, but it does have to be funded and resourced for it to be done well.
That's it. I do think there's probably a baseline level of support, but absolutely it can be scaled according to basically the criticality of the capability you're providing, and I think that will very much be shaped by what you're trying to protect.
So, I mean, a whistle-stop tour there through the new guidance that's been published by DSTL, and we'll be taking a much deeper dive into some of these areas in future podcasts and possibly even a webinar in order to look at this in more detail. But for now, there you have it. There's a flavour, some of the problems that are emerging as a result of the new Secure by Design assurance methodology. And I'm sure there will be more to come as we get using the methodology in more depth and more detail and get more experience of doing it. But for now, thank you to my guest, Michael Hayes.
Yeah, thanks, Mike.
This has been the Advent IM podcast, Risk and Business. As always, if you like it, then like it, and don't forget to share it. Make sure that you subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. And if there's something that you think we should be covering, then reach out and let us know. Until then, I've been Mike Gillespie, Chief Executive, Advent IM.